Good morning. Happy Friday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. So obviously we're in the purple room today. I needed the help from Alfred here. We're going to talk about what it takes to acquire the rack position in the front squat. I got a question from Derek who's having some trouble. He's not sure what strategies to use to help him improve his front rack for the front squat. So we're going to talk about how we get there, what it's actually going to take, what some of the limitations are, and then some demonstrations of some activities that are going to help you improve your capability to achieve the rack position in the front squat. One of the things that we have to appreciate about getting into this front rack position for a front squat is that we have to move the shoulder through an excursion of range of motion to even acquire this position. So if you recall, this lower part of traditional shoulder flexion is actually an external rotation bias, and then we have to bias ourselves towards internal rotation. So if I have a limitation in either position, I'm going to have a limitation on my ability to acquire my front rack position in the front squat or a power clean. If I have a posterior lower compression on the back side of this rib cage, it's going to limit my ability to acquire my external rotation bias as I start to elevate my arm. What it's going to do, it's going to move me towards an internal rotation bias too soon, because the scapula is going to start to move. It's going to start to compress against the back side of the rib cage, and then by the time I try to get into my internal rotation bias, I've already exhausted all my internal rotation. So now it's almost impossible for me to comfortably acquire the rack position in the front squat. If I do have posterior expansion and I can get through this external rotation bias without difficulty, but I don't have an up pump handle capability or an expansion in the anterior upper rib cage, I'll never have enough internal rotation in the shoulder to acquire the rack position in the front squat comfortably. So those folks that think that external rotation is the limitation in holding the front rack position are only partially correct, because it's the early limitation of external rotation that is a limiting factor. But it could be an internal rotation problem or an external rotation problem that ultimately limits my ability to acquire and utilize the front rack position comfortably. If you lack the up pump handle in the front, meaning you don't have enough internal rotation, what you're going to probably see is you're going to start to see the elbow deviate laterally. And so this is somewhat trying to reacquire some external rotation so you have more internal rotation available to you to actually acquire and utilize the rack position. So the inability to keep the upper back expanded not only restricts my ability to hold my position, but it's also going to make it very difficult to increase the load of my front squat. So now when we think about activities that we want to utilize to reinforce our ability to expand in the appropriate areas to acquire the rack position, we want to think about, okay, what expands the posterior lower? What can give me the up pump handle, and what can give me that yielding strategy in the upper back? So there's a lot of activities that actually reinforce all of these aspects of this expansion all at the same time. So this is where bear crawls really come into play. Because of the orientation of the body, I'm going to emphasize that lower posterior expansion of the rib cage. I'll immediately get the yielding strategy in the upper back, and because of the shoulder girdle position as I'm going through the propulsive phase of quadruped, I'm also going to create the up pump handle position. Plate squats are a great way to reinforce this early propulsive strategy that we're going to utilize in the front squat as well. The heel's elevated position puts the ankle in the early propulsive phase. It's going to create a posterior expansion in the pelvis as well as that posterior expansion in the upper back. If we need to do something that's a little bit more rehab-ish, or we're having trouble acquiring the position to begin with, we want to do something that's a little bit simpler. So we're going to start in maybe a child's pose, which is actually the bottom position of the front squat. We'll move into an inverted position, which is going to invert our airflow and allow us to increase our ability to expand through the upper thorax. We're going to bring that pump handle up and expand the posterior upper back. To challenge us a little bit more, then we're going to bring you back to upright, and we're going to do something like a backward sled drag, which is also going to place the foot in an early propulsive strategy and teach us to expand the upper back against some resistance. So there's a lot of activities that we can utilize rather than trying to rely on some ineffective form of stretching, which might give you some sort of temporary impact in your ability to acquire the rack position. But ultimately, you have to reteach yourself to expand in the appropriate areas, to move the shoulder through its full excursion to get to the rack position. Now, worst case scenarios, we still have to train. So what are going to be your substitutions? So right away, we elevate the heels, we get posterior expansion, so maybe that's going to be sufficient for you to acquire a better rack position and a more effective front squat. If you can't acquire the position for the shoulder, a really common substitution is to take some lifting straps, wrap them around the bar, and that's going to allow you to at least get the shoulder into a position where we can actually support the bar across the shoulders. But keep in mind, I still need to get that anterior posterior expansion in the thorax, so I have a place to rest that weight. So the expansion of the thorax provides us the shelf that we're going to ultimately use to hold the rack position. Derek, hopefully that gives you some strategies and some ideas that you can utilize to improve your own front squat. If you have any questions, send them to askbillhartman@gmail.com. I will see you guys next week.